Hi, I'm Katie Davis. I'm an author and an illustrator, and I have a podcast called Brain Burps About Books. And recently I started doing some videos with illustrators or people who have some good show and tell. So this week on my podcast, on the audio podcast, is Dan Yaccarino, who is an amazing illustrator. And he had some fun show and tell from his studio, and I included that in this video. But I kind of chopped it up this week, so all you're going to see is me skipping around with his show and tell, which is pretty cool. And if you want to listen to the full interview, go to the podcast and you can listen to it there.
Brain Burps About Book, Katie Davis's.
So do you have some show and tell for us?
Yes, I have lots of show and tell.
Yay.
You guys, what would you like to see? Would you
Everything.
Like to see? I have a new book that just came out about a month ago. I'll grab it here. And it's called Kate and Nate Are Running Late. And I did the illustrations for this book. I did not write it.
Who wrote it?
It's written by Kate Egan, and she's a wonderful author. And she just gave me a great story to have a lot of fun with. And that's what I look for in a manuscript, is where is the room for me to tell my part of the story? Where can I inject my opinion or my visual version of this story? So it's about
Dan,
mostly about a mother and a son who seem to be these sort of chronically late people. They just can't get their act together, and they wake up, of course, late to go to school, and the little boy is, shouting at the mother to, what time it is. And so I had a really good time, because I think this is a common situation in a lot of households with children, and it's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. And so I really enjoyed working on this book, and just these little details, which actually you can see a little bit better. And let me see, I have the right painting here.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Do authors ever give you art notes?
Only when it's necessary for the story.
Like what? Can you remember something specifically?
Well, some things have to happen. With this book, I don't think so. I'm trying to think of a good art note that was required for the story to be told. Something had to happen visually, and I love that. I like those art notes. I'm less interested in the little girl has to have brown curly hair. Why is it, endemic to this? No, it just, my daughter has brown curly hair. Well, you know what? Not really important. I'm going to visualize these characters the way that I see fit. So I'm more interested in if something had to happen visually to make the story work. And those are the only art notes that I am interested in. And mostly those are, all the art notes are vetted by the editor. They know that the only art notes that need to be left are just things that make the story move ahead. Right. They're less interested. The people that I work with are less interested, same as me, with, well, my kid has 4 freckles over here and 3 over here. Well, congratulations. May or may not end up in the book, because it's not my vision for it.
Yeah,
so this is a typical painting. I usually work a little bit bigger than the print size. So you can see here that, and this is why I love painting, is that I love, there's a little fruit bowl, there's a calendar, there's, the kids are, magneted to the refrigerator, their tests and their drawings and different things like that. And I got to draw this little spice rack here. And it's just little tiny details incorporated with big gestures and the overall design. This kid's sort of fooling around. He's juggling the fruit. The dog is eating the waffle. The mother's really concerned. She's trying to make the kids' lunches. And the sister here, who doesn't really appear in the text until a couple of spreads later, is sort of above it all. She's got her little plaid skirt, and she's all dressed and she's ready to go. And so I injected that into the book. And like I said, she doesn't appear in the text until much later. But I wanted to put her earlier. And as an illustrator, I'm telling my end of the story. And this is what I've decided. Even though she's not in the text, I decided that the sister should be introduced into maybe the 3rd spread or the 2nd spread or something like that. So that's my job. That's what I enjoy doing. And a lot of manuscripts that I get, which I say no thank you to, really dictate a lot of that. And there's no room for me to interpret anything or to tell my own story or my own version of the story. So I like stories that are sort of open-ended. I just illustrated a book called Boy and Bot, And that was a very spare text, and that's why I had such a great time doing it. That's why I was truly invested in that book, because there was so much room for me to tell my end of the story. So those are the manuscripts that I usually gravitate towards, less towards, sort of these, what I would consider some overwritten or heavily written, because it really doesn't leave any room for me. In a picture book, the pictures tell the story. The pictures do the heavy lifting. The pictures tell 75% of the story. The text is there in a very well-written book, and something that I strive to do when I write my books. The only text that should be in the book should be things that the images can't convey. And that's really what I strive for in my own books. And what I look for when I have manuscripts offered to me.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and that's and also the idea of pulling them apart. You can't entirely tell what's going on, and I think that's also a good marriage right there. Is that they what is that quote, that they're greater than the sum of their parts. When they're together, they produce something much greater than, say, this is 50% or this is 50%. It becomes a sort of a third entity when they're put together. And I think those are the great picture books. Those are the things that, we all notice, but maybe we can't quite articulate it. But I really try to do that. I strive for that in my own work when I write and illustrate. Yeah,
I do too. And I always think of it sort of as two tent poles leaning against each other. If you take one away, the other one falls down. Exactly. And so they have to lean on each other and give each other support, but without overtaking the other one. Otherwise, it's not equal. But yeah, I agree. That's true.
Yeah.
What else do you have for us? And I also want to talk about your experience with Nickelodeon and how that all happened.
Sure.
How you first started with.
For anyone who knows my work, I'm hoping this is a familiar book every Friday.
Yeah, that's a great book.
This is a book I did about 7 years ago.
Hi, I'm Katie Davis.
This was kind of a tough book for me to sell, because there's no story.
I'm Katie Davis. I'm an author and an illustrator, and I have
father
a
and son
called Brain Burps About Books.
Leaving in the morning.
I started doing some videos with illustrators.
Weekly
people have some good show and tell.
I
love that.
So really about the father
on my
and
podcast,
son going out,
audio podcast,
and
is Dan Yaccarino, who's an amazing illustrator.
Me and my son.
Fun show and tell.
It's really about the two of us.
I included that in this video, but I kind of chopped it up this week, so all you're going to see is me skipping around,
going to high school. But these are the things that we would see. We would see a building going up,
interview,
a little bit at a time, and we both sort of pause there and watch it. And it was a moment, and this sort of, for me, really captures the spirit of the book. Is that everyone is rushing, but we're taking our time. And that's what that, say, hour and a half that we had together. And I really wanted to put that in a book. And the story ends, or towards the end of the story, they go to the diner and they have breakfast. But really, it's the journey they have getting there. And like I said, there's no story. It's just sort of a moment. And that was the hard sell. But an editor... Laura Godwin at Henry Holt really saw the value in it, and so I was able to get this book published. And it's a very important book. It's very close to my heart, and I'm so grateful that I am able to do books like this that are sort of quiet. I do lots of loud books and sort of high concept books and different things like that. But I'm just so happy that I'm able to do books like these every once in a while. Hang on, I think you disappeared. Oh, there you are. So this is a painting, and again I work a little bit bigger, and I don't have the sketches for this book. Probably when I started to work, do the sketches digitally.
Oh, you do the sketches digitally? You don't do them by hand and then scan them in?
It's like sort of a mix. I'll get the rough idea down, and then I'll scan it, and then I'll put the details in with the Wacom tablet. This is a book that came out recently, another very personal book. It's a story about my great-grandfather coming to the United States, and then the story picks up with my grandfather, then my father, and I'm even in the book. And this was sort of the weird weirdest experience I've ever had doing a book. I mean, I really had this idea sort of floating around in my head for a long time. And I had this idea about doing a book about the generations and about my grandfather, beginning with my grandfather in Italy and coming to the United States and coming into New York City through Ellis Island. And I never could quite crack the part of the story that joins the generations together. And I can show you, I've had, hang on. I've had this shovel. This shovel is pretty old, and when I was growing up, my father told me that this shovel, which was, when I was growing up, was being used in our house. It was being used to spread rock salt on the driveway. And it's just a simple utilitarian, you know, one piece of metal. And he told me that when I was growing up, I remember him mentioning, you know, this shovel belonged to your grandfather, and he had an Italian market, and he would use it to scoop up dried beans or olives or different things like that and put it on the scale. And so I always remembered that. And when I moved out of my parents' house, I remember gathering up all of my things and, you know, my art supplies and my books and different things like that. And I distinctly remember going to the garage and pulling this shovel out of the barrel of rock salt that we had in the corner of the garage, and I just threw it in the box, and I kept it with me, and it was on the shelf in every apartment I had in Manhattan, with my, you know, growing toy collection and my books and different things like that. And a few years later, about 5 years into working, I started to create picture books, and I started to write them, and so as that picked up more and more, I started thinking about more and more stories, and I've had this story about my great-grandfather in my head for at least 15 years. And I could never quite crack, how do I link the generations? And one day my wife came into the studio, and she picked up the shovel, and she asked me, can I use this to do a little gardening? We had a little terrace, and she was doing some container gardening. Can I use this? And then at that moment, I realized it's the shovel that connected generations in the story. And I finally wrote down the book, because I had just been sort of floating around in my head for years and years and years. And I put together the dummy very, very quickly, and I sent it to my agent, my literary agent, and she called me very quickly, and she said, "This is great. This is a very, you know, interesting story. It's great. It's about immigration. It's personal." And then suddenly I felt really weird about it. It's such a vulnerable thing, because it's about my family. It's about me. I'm actually put myself at the very end of the book, and I said, "You know what? Delete it. Forget I ever sent it to you. I'd rather not do it." Because she's like, no. We'll send it to your editor at Knopf, and trust me. And I kept saying, you know, really, I have second thoughts about this. Nobody really cares about my family. Nobody, you know, trust me. This is a common immigrant experience, and it's not as personal as you may think it is. And so we sent it to my editor, Nancy, at Knopf, and within an hour, Nancy called back and said, I want it. Wow. I will give you a contract for it. And then I tried to talk Nancy out of it, and she, you know, would have none of that. So I ended up doing the book. And the struggle was to put more of me in the book, which, again, I felt very kind of strange, because I'm in like 3 spreads in this book, and I just stuck myself at the end of the original story. And weirdly, as more personal as the book, you know, over the evolution of doing the dummies and rewriting it, the book became more personal. The story became more specific to my family, but in a really strange way, it became more universal. And I've heard from lots of, I get lots of emails about this book, of people sharing their family stories. And it doesn't matter if they're, you know, not from Italy. They could be from anywhere else. Right. And it sort of mirrors a lot of family stories. That first family member that came to the U.S. and, you know, sort of forged the path and had a family and all of that. And so it was a very interesting experience. And when I started to work on this book, and my grandmother was still living while I was doing some research, and I learned a lot about my family, but the thing that I really learned about was myself. And we are sort of the sum. I learned that we are sort of the sum of all the people that came before us. And I never thought that I would come to that conclusion. I mean, we think of ourselves as individuals.
Right.
But honestly, through this book, I really learned that, you know, I am a product of all the generations that came before me. So here is an image. This is the first image from the book. And what I tried to do, even though the story begins 100 years ago, what I really tried to do is create a sense of completion. So this is the first, you know, as you saw, this is the first spread of the book. And then so it goes across the 20th century, and it ends in present day. This is the last spread of the book.
It's great.
Really tried to do is
I love that kind of connection. Right. Yeah, I love that kind of connection and mirroring.
Really trying to create this kind of cycle.
So what else you got for us to show and tell? Because we're getting towards the end here.
Okay, so influences. You know, I love little golden book illustrators. And my favorite is a guy named J.P. Miller. He just, for me, is the best. I just adore his work. I mean, he's just, you know, he did, I think, at least 2 of the original, what is it, the first dozen that they produced, like Color Kittens and Saggy Baggy Elephant and all of that. So I adore J.P. Miller's work. And then, as you may know, here it is. Wait a minute. I did 2 golden books, actually.
I did not
I was
know
just
that.
beyond thrilled
to
have it come out in this format, because this is, you know, the format that everyone grows up with. We see it in the grocery store, the drugstore when we're growing up, and now it's at Target and Walmart and, you know, all these different places, and they're kind of still just, I mean, the quality is so high, and it has that nostalgia factor, so you put those 2 things together, and it's just really wonderful. So, you know, I collect these books. You know, I mean, I have more over there, but, you know, I collect these books, and I have been collecting them ever since I really started writing and illustrating picture books. So when the editor of Little Golden called me, they asked me, you know, would you be part of this new wave of author illustrators to produce original titles for golden books? I was just beyond thrilled. I mean, this is like, you know, that was it for me. I was just, and
I'm done.
They asked me, you know, what do you want to do? And I, you know, sort of grappled with that, but then I decided I want to do my own version of Mother Goose. You know, my sort of, you know, my little urban hip version of Mother Goose. There's, you know, Mary, Miss Muffet, I'm sorry, at the diner, you know, scared away by the spider that's at the counter. So I loved it. So this is, you know, these guys are my influences. There's also early Richard Scarry work, which I'm a giant fan of.
You can see the influence.
He did some lovely work that I don't know how many people know about it. And it's just this beautiful, I don't know what he used. It could be watercolor, it could be gouache, but I'm just such a giant fan of his early work as well. And most people associate him with the pen and ink and watercolor stuff, but you know, I just want to show you one. I mean, this is, you know, it's exciting for me because I really love the work. I mean, just look at this.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
See that? I mean, how gorgeous is that? There's so much going on. It's all pulled together, and there's some cubism in there thrown in, and there's just, it's amazing. These are the stuff like this really truly inspires me, and it gives me something to shoot for in my own work. Not that I'm really trying to rip them off, although I may borrow some things once in a while.
Hey, but, inspiration, you never know.
It's stuff like this that really gets me excited and really, you know, inspires me.
If you like that video, I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, Brain Burps About Books. After the video is over, just go up here to subscribe, click it, and you'll be notified of new videos from this channel, just like it says.